Welcome to this channel. At the sum of 1,000 subscribers, I will post a series of special stories for you. Subscribe. Commander Eli Quinn was not a man who believed in destiny. He had spent his entire life fighting against the odds, clawing his way up through the ranks of the United Space Command, USC, until his reputation became legendary. But that was before the Dorgan incident. Now, Quinn was little more than a shadow of his former self, disgraced, demoted, and exiled to a remote orbital outpost on the fringes of human space. Outpost K-17 was nothing more than a glorified junkyard, an obsolete station barely maintained by a skeleton crew. It orbited an ice-cold dwarf planet in the unremarkable Zalor system, far from the bustling starports and military headquarters that had once defined Quinn's life. No one visited K-17 unless they had to, and no one contacted it either. For Quinn, it was the perfect place to disappear. He spent most of his days drifting between the outpost's empty corridors, haunted by the memory of the mission that had ended his career. His last crew, the best soldiers and scientists he had ever known, were gone, lost to the vastness of space during a botched rescue attempt in the Dorgan Nebula. He had given the orders. He had led them into the unknown. And he had led them to their deaths. Quinn had been forgotten by the world until the signal came. It started as a low hum in the communications array, just a faint, unrecognizable noise picked up by the outpost's long-range sensors. At first, Quinn ignored it, chalking it up to the usual cosmic radiation or interference from nearby nebulae. But then the signal grew stronger. His curiosity piqued. Quinn sat down at the console in the comms room, brushing dust off the unused equipment. The station's outdated systems struggled to analyze the signal, but they eventually displayed a waveform on the screen. It was no random interference, it had a pattern. Quinn leaned forward, his brow furrowing as he stared at the data. The signal pulsed in rhythmic bursts, repeating itself in intervals too precise to be natural. The computers worked to decode it, but their basic algorithms failed to make sense of the complex structure. He glanced at the outpost's dated databanks, realizing that they lacked the necessary tools to analyze such an anomaly. With a frustrated grunt, Quinn pulled up a manual input and began working to enhance the signal himself. Years of experience in deep space had honed his skills. He could hear patterns in the static, rhythms in the noise that others might miss. This wasn't just a signal. It was a message. After hours of laboring over the console, Quinn finally isolated part of the transmission. What appeared on his screen made his heart skip a beat, a series of glyphs and symbols, none of which matched any known human language or alien dialect. They weren't random, they were deliberate, purposeful. Someone or something was trying to communicate. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Contact with alien civilizations was something every space commander dreamed of, but in the centuries since humans had expanded beyond Earth, intelligent extraterrestrial life had never been found. There had been rumors and strange occurrences, but nothing this concrete. Nothing this direct. Quinn's heart raced. He should contact the USC. The protocol was clear. Any sign of alien communication had to be immediately reported to command. But then, he remembered his position in Outcast, a man whose career had been destroyed. The USC wouldn't listen to him. They'd likely take the discovery from him, leaving him to watch from the sidelines. Or worse, they'd bury the signal altogether, fearing what might happen if it became public knowledge. As Quinn stared at the symbols on the screen, a thought crept into his mind. He had nothing left to lose. The guilt of his past weighed on him, crushing his spirit daily. But here, in this moment, was something extraordinary. Something that could define his legacy not as the man who failed his crew, but as the first human to make contact with an intelligent alien race. Ignoring the doubt gnawing at the back of his mind, Quinn began constructing a reply. Using the alien signal structure as a foundation, he mimicked the glyphs as best he could, translating human language into mathematical sequences and universal constants. His message was simple: who are you? He hesitated before hitting send, his finger hovering over the button. The implications of this were enormous. This could spark a new era for humanity, or it could bring unimaginable danger. But the thrill of discovery overpowered his caution. He pressed the button. The message was sent. For hours, Quinn sat in the cold, dimly lit control room, staring at the screen, waiting for a response that might never come. The station's low hum was the only sound, as the minutes stretched into hours, and hours into the dead of night. Quinn fought off exhaustion, refusing to sleep, afraid he might miss something. Then, without warning, the console beeped. Quinn's heart leaped in his chest. His eyes darted to the screen, where a new signal appeared stronger, more intense than before. His breath caught as the symbols began scrolling across the display. They were different now, more complex, intricate patterns interwoven with the original glyphs. It wasn't just a reply. It was an invitation. A low rumble shook the outpost, rattling the walls around him. Quinn instinctively reached for the controls, bringing up the station's external sensors. His blood ran cold. Approaching the station was a ship. But it wasn't human. The vessel was colossal, easily 5 times the size of any Earth cruiser. Its hull was sleek and black, adorned with glowing veins of light that pulsed rhythmically, in sync with the alien signal. The craft moved silently, casting a long shadow across the outpost as it approached. Quinn's stomach knotted in fear and awe. He had expected a response, perhaps another message, or maybe some faint signal. But this? An actual alien ship, right outside his station. A notification pinged on his console. A new message, directed specifically to him. It was short, but clear, "Come along." Quinn stared at the words, his mind racing. There was no mistaking it. Whoever or whatever was aboard that ship had come for him. This wasn't just a simple exchange of signals anymore. It was an encounter. And Quinn was the only man who dared to answer. The alien ship loomed outside the station, casting an ominous shadow over Outpost K-17 as it hovered silently in the void. Commander Eli Quinn sat frozen at his console, eyes locked on the message flashing across the screen, "Come along." The enormity of what had just happened pressed down on him like a weight he hadn't felt in years. He had sent a message, a simple inquiry into the unknown, and now he was staring at an alien craft, something no human had ever witnessed. The rational part of his mind told him to call for backup, to inform the United Space Command immediately. But he knew better. There was no time, and even if he did, the USC would seize control and leave him in the cold. This was his chance. His only chance to be more than just a forgotten name. Quinn pushed himself to his feet, his body shaking with adrenaline. He glanced out the small viewport of the station, trying to gauge the size of the alien ship. Its sheer scale was awe-inspiring. The vessel looked like a floating monolith of seamless black metal, crisscrossed by glowing lines that pulsed like a heartbeat. The lights seemed to throb in time with the alien signal, as if the ship itself were alive. Taking a deep breath, Quinn moved to the docking bay. The outpost's aging systems groaned to life as he activated the airlock and prepared for the approach. His mind raced with questions. What did the aliens want? Why had they chosen him? He had no illusions about being special, not after all he had lost. But somehow, in their eyes, he mattered. And that was enough to make him move forward. As he entered the small, cramped cockpit of his personal shuttle, the Resolute, the memories of his last mission clawed at the edges of his mind. The faces of his crew flashed before him, his friends, his colleagues, all lost because of a decision he had made. This time would be different, he told himself. This time, he would get it right. The Resolute was a relic of an older era, barely functional after years of neglect. Its panels flickered to life, sputtering with static as Quinn ran a quick systems check. The ship groaned as it lifted off from the docking bay, moving slowly toward the alien vessel. The flight was short, but every second felt like an eternity. His hands gripped the controls tightly, knuckles white, as he approached the massive craft. God, I hope this thing holds together, Quinn muttered to himself, glancing at the failing navigation readouts. As he neared the alien ship, a section of its hull began to shift. Panels slid open, revealing a docking port large enough to swallow the resolute hull. It was eerie how effortlessly the alien craft adapted to his arrival, as though it had anticipated his every move. He had no choice but to trust it. The docking sequence was smooth, almost too smooth, as if the alien ship had taken control. The Resolute settled into the port with a gentle thud, the interior lighting of the alien vessel casting an eerie green glow through the cockpit window. For a moment, Quinn just sat there, staring, trying to calm his racing heart. "It's just an encounter," he told himself. "You've trained for this. You've prepared for this your whole life." But deep down, Quinn knew nothing could have prepared him for this. With a shaky breath, he activated the airlock and stepped out of the shuttle. The air inside the alien craft was cold, the temperature noticeably lower than what humans found comfortable. The gravity, though slightly lighter, was close enough to Earth standard that he didn't stumble as he walked forward. A soft, rhythmic hum resonated through the floor, vibrating through his boots as he took his first steps inside the ship. The corridor ahead of him was unlike anything Quinn had ever seen. The walls seemed to ripple with an organic sheen, smooth and seamless, as if they had been grown rather than constructed. Light came from no visible source, bathing everything in a pale, shifting glow that followed him as he moved deeper into the ship. He half expected some kind of welcoming committee, maybe armed guards or robotic sentinels, but the passage remained empty and quiet, save for the ever-present hum. It was unnerving, walking alone through a vessel so clearly advanced, yet finding no signs of life. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, to retreat to the safety of his shuttle, but he pressed on, his curiosity stronger than his fear. At the far end of the corridor, a massive door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a central chamber. Quinn hesitated at the threshold, his pulse quickening. The room was vast, much larger than the corridors, its ceiling arching high above like a cathedral dome. The walls shimmered with strange symbols, the same glyphs that had been transmitted in the original message. They pulsed and shifted, forming patterns that danced along the walls in an almost hypnotic display. And standing in the center of the room was the alien. Quinn's breath caught in his throat as he took in the creature before him. It stood at least 8 feet tall, its body slender and graceful, covered in a skin that shimmered with a pearlescent glow. The being's elongated limbs moved fluidly, as though it was part of the very air around it. Its face was both familiar and alien. 2 large, almond-shaped eyes dominated its head, glowing faintly with an inner light. There was no mouth, no nose, just a smooth surface where a human's features would have been. The alien's body seemed to emit a faint, otherworldly glow that shifted colors with each movement, from cool blues to deep purples and emerald greens. It was like watching a living aurora, every color blending seamlessly into the next. But it was the eyes that captured Quinn's attention. They were unblinking, fixed on him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Quinn's first instinct was to speak, to introduce himself, but before he could open his mouth, the alien raised one long, slender arm. A pulse of energy rippled through the room, and Quinn felt something hit him, not physically, but mentally. It was like a pressure against his mind, a presence that pushed against his thoughts, not forceful, but undeniable. Then, without words, he heard it. Not a voice, but a series of thoughts and emotions, streaming directly into his consciousness. Images flashed before his eye, stars being born, worlds colliding, civilizations rising and falling. It was overwhelming, like trying to drink from a fire hose of cosmic knowledge. He staggered back, clutching his head. "Who are you?" Quinn managed to gasp, his voice barely above a whisper. The alien tilted its head slightly, its luminous eyes still fixed on him. More thoughts flooded his mind, but this time, they were more focused, more deliberate. He saw a name, or what passed for a name in the alien's language, Kaler. The being before him was called Kaler, a representative of a race known as the Vorthali. Quinn took a shaky breath, trying to steady himself as Kaler's thoughts continued to flow into his mind. The Vorthali had been watching humanity for longer than Quinn could comprehend, observing from the distant stars as humans expanded across the galaxy. But now, something had changed, something urgent. He saw flashes of a nebula, swirling with violent energy. He saw starships consumed by darkness, entire worlds lost. The Zeta 9 Nebula. The images came faster now, more intense, as Kaler's emotions bled into his thoughts. There was a threat, an ancient force, something imprisoned within the nebula that had begun to stir. And it was up to Quinn to stop it. You. Quinn's voice trembled as he struggled to process the magnitude of what he was seeing. You want me to help you? Kaler's answer was not a word, but a feeling an overwhelming sense of inevitability. You are the one who made contact. Quinn swallowed hard, the weight of the alien's message pressing due. Quinn stood in the vast chamber, his mind reeling from the flood of alien thoughts and emotions pouring into him. The Vorthali Kaler's race had been watching humanity for centuries, and now they were asking for his help. It felt surreal, like a dream he might wake from at any moment, but the pressure in his skull, the vivid images flashing before his eyes, were all too real. Kaler's luminous figure stood motionless before him, its towering presence dominating the space. Quinn's legs felt weak, and his breath came in shallow gasps as he tried to comprehend the full scope of what Kaler had just shown him. The Zeta 9 Nebula, with its swirling storms of cosmic energy, wasn't just a random cluster of stars. It was a prison, a containment field for something ancient and unfathomably powerful. The images Kaler projected into his mind came faster now, more focused. Quinn saw a flash of light, a supernova. Then, the dark shape of an enormous, malevolent entity. It writhed and lashed against invisible bonds, as if caged by the very fabric of spacetime. He could feel the thing's hunger, its rage, as it strained to break free. Through Kaler's silent communication, Quinn learned that the entity, known to the Vorthali as Vorithis, had been sealed away long before humanity had ever crawled out of Earth's atmosphere. Vorithis was not a living being in the traditional sense, it was pure energy, a force of chaos and destruction. And for millennia, it had been contained within the heart of the nebula, its influence kept in check by the Vorthali and their technology. But the seal was weakening. Quinn's breath hitched as Kaler's next thoughts entered his mind. The disappearances of ships near the nebula, those mysterious cases the USC had written off as navigational accidents, were not accidents at all. Vorithis had begun to stir, its growing power distorting space and time within the nebula. Ships caught in its influence were simply erased. For the Vorthali, the situation had reached a crisis point. The entity's prison was failing, and once Vorithis escaped, it would not stop. It would devour entire systems, feed on the energy of stars, and eventually plunge entire galaxies into darkness. And here, in the corner of that nightmare, was humanity, small, fragile, unaware of the cosmic horror just beyond their borders. Quinn's voice cracked as he finally spoke, his words tinged with disbelief. Why me? Why not the USC? Why not send this message to the people who actually matter? Kaler's eyes seemed to glow brighter, and for a moment, Quinn felt the alien's emotions wash over him, calm, patient, yet heavy with purpose. Kaler projected more images into his mind, this time of Quinn himself. His life, his career, the Dorgan incident. Quinn's heart clenched as the faces of his fallen crew appeared before him, memories he had tried so hard to bury. He saw the mission unfold in brutal detail, his decisions, his failures, and the catastrophic explosion that left him the sole survivor. You have known loss, Kaler's thoughts resonated in Quinn's mind. You understand the weight of sacrifice. Others would fear. You do not. The words hit Quinn like a punch to the gut. Fear? Of course he felt fear. He had been afraid ever since that fateful mission, afraid of making the same mistake again. But deep down, Kaler was right. Quinn had nothing left to lose. The ghosts of his past had already taken everything from him, his crew, his reputation, his hope for redemption. And now, faced with the impossible, Quinn realized that there was no room left for fear. There was only action. But that still didn't explain why Kaler had sought him out specifically. Why me, out of all the humans? Quinn thought, knowing the alien could sense his question. Kaler's response came not with words, but with another series of images. Quinn saw himself at the outpost, alone in the control room, when the signal had first arrived. He saw the other officers, the scientists, the military strategists of the USC, each of them receiving the same signal, each of them turning away, afraid of the unknown. The USC had been too cautious, too bureaucratic to act. Only Quinn, in his isolation and desperation, had taken the step to respond. You are the one who dared to reach out, Kaler conveyed, when others would not. You have already made the first contact. The rest must follow. Quinn shook his head, still trying to wrap his mind around the enormity of the situation. But what can I do? I'm just one man. The chamber pulsed with a deep hum, and Kaler took a step closer. Quinn could feel the air shift, the presence of the alien filling the space between them. A new wave of images surged through his mind this time, more practical, more urgent. Quinn saw the inner workings of the Titan, Kaler's ship, a marvel of technology far beyond anything humanity had ever conceived. He saw complex energy signatures, weapons of unimaginable power, and at the heart of it all, a device designed to reinforce the failing seal around the nebula. The Vorthali had developed a solution and energy-based weapon that could stabilize the rift-holding Vorithis at bay. But it had to be delivered into the nebula's core with precision. Quinn's ship, the Resolute, though outdated, was small enough to navigate the unstable regions of space around the nebula. The Vorthali's technology could augment the ship, making it capable of surviving the intense gravitational distortions within the nebula. But there was a catch. The mission would be a one-way trip. Quinn swallowed hard as the realization sank in. The energy required to close the rift would be enormous enough to tear apart anything within proximity, including the ship that delivered it. There was no escape once the device was activated. His hands clenched into fists as he processed the alien's plan. You want me to fly into the nebula, drop the device, and die? Kaler's eyes, still locked on Quinn's, flickered with a deep, almost sorrowful glow. It wasn't a demand. It was a request. A request for a sacrifice. Quinn's mind raced. Could he really do this? Could he willingly walk into the heart of a deadly nebula, knowing it would be the end of him? He had already lost so much: his crew, his future. Was this really the answer? Or was it just another way to run from the guilt that had haunted him for years? Before he could answer his own questions, Kaler's thoughts pushed into his mind once more, this time slower, gentler. Images of the galaxy spread out before him: Earth, the colonies, the stars humanity had just begun to reach. He saw cities filled with people, laughing, living. He saw families, children growing up under the warmth of distant suns. And then, the darkness. Vorithis, unleashed, consuming everything in its path. The stars winked out, one by one, until only silence remained. Kaler's message was clear: if Quinn did nothing, that future would be inevitable. The Vorthali could not act alone. They needed a human pilot to deliver the device, someone capable of navigating the nebula's chaotic distortions. Someone who had nothing left to fear. The room felt colder, the weight of the alien's gaze heavier than ever. You can still walk away, Quinn muttered to himself, his voice barely audible. You don't have to do this. But as he stood there, staring into the alien's glowing eyes, something inside him shifted. Quinn had been running from his past for too long. He had let his guilt define him, let his failures turn him into a shell of the man he once was. This mission, this impossible, one-way mission, wasn't just about saving the galaxy. It was about redemption. Quinn straightened his back, the tension in his muscles loosening as he made his decision. Fine, he said, his voice stronger now. I'll do it. Kaler's form pulsed with light, a silent acknowledgement of his choice. The alien's eyes dimmed slightly, as if showing a rare moment of respect. Quinn took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over him. The fear was still there, lurking at the edges of his mind, but it no longer controlled him. He had made his choice, and now there was only the mission. Kaler turned and gestured toward the far side of the chamber, where a new passage had opened, leading deeper into the ship. Quinn didn't hesitate. He followed, stepping into the unknown. The silence inside the Resolute was deafening as Commander Eli Quinn sat alone in the cockpit, staring out at the swirling mass of energy that formed the Zeta-9 Nebula. The nebula was more than just a storm of cosmic gases. It was alive with violent pulses of energy, twisting and turning like a celestial hurricane. The closer he got, the more the colors shifted from vibrant blues and purples to deep, ominous reds, as if warning him to turn back. But there was no turning back now. Quinn's hands moved over the controls with practiced precision, his mind focused, sharper than it had been in years. The ship was shaking, rattling under the pressure of the nebula's gravitational distortions, but the Resolute was holding together for now. Kaler and the Vorthali had modified the ship with their advanced technology, strengthening its hull and shielding systems. Without it, Quinn knew he wouldn't have survived the journey even this far. Still, he could feel the ship straining under the immense forces of the nebula. The modified systems blared warnings on the display, showing fluctuating energy readings that spiked wildly. His course took him deeper into the swirling vortex, where space itself seemed to bend and warp around him. The colors outside the cockpit became an eerie blur, as if reality was beginning to unravel at the edges. "Steady, girl. Just hold on a little longer," Quinn muttered, patting the side of the control panel as if reassuring the ship itself. In many ways, the Resolute had been his only companion for years. It was an old vessel, battle-worn and temperamental, but it had never failed him, at least, not yet. His mind raced back to the conversation with Kaler on board the Titan. The mission was simple in theory: deliver the Vorthali's energy device into the heart of the nebula and trigger it at the precise moment when the rift was most unstable. The device would release a massive surge of energy, powerful enough to reseal the prison holding the entity known as Vorithis. But there was one crucial detail: the energy release would destroy anything within proximity, including the Resolute. Quinn had accepted that part. He'd made peace with it. There was no other option. He glanced at the console's readout. The device was primed and ready, its containment field humming with barely restrained power. The Vorthali had explained its workings to him, though the complexity of the technology was beyond anything humanity had ever developed. It was a weapon of precision, designed not to kill, but to contain its energy pulse, tailored specifically to repair the rift that Vorithis was using to break free. As the Resolute flew deeper into the nebula, Quinn could feel the entity's presence. It was not a physical sensation, but a weight on his mind, a dark, suffocating force that seemed to press against the edges of his consciousness. Vorithis was aware of him now. The malevolent being, once imprisoned, could sense the approach of its would-be captor. "Stay focused," Quinn whispered to himself, his eyes fixed on the display. The ship's sensors were picking up massive energy fluctuations ahead, readings that defied the laws of physics. Space bent and twisted as the nebula's core came into view. It was a sight Quinn would never forget. At the heart of the nebula was a swirling vortex of light and darkness, a tear in the fabric of spacetime itself. Energy surged around it like a whirlpool, twisting with terrifying intensity. And within that storm of chaos, Quinn saw an amorphous, shadowy presence, barely visible but undeniably there. Vorithis. The entity's shape was indistinct, constantly shifting, like smoke trapped in a hurricane. It radiated an overwhelming sense of hunger, of anger, as if it had waited millennia to break free. His chest tightened, fear clawing at his mind, but he pushed it aside. This was the moment. Quinn's fingers flew over the controls, aligning the Resolute with the precise coordinates Kaler had given him. The device was locked into the ship's launch bay, set to release its payload into the heart of the rift. The timing had to be perfect. One misstep, and the device would detonate too early or too late, failing to seal the rift and allowing Vorithis to escape. The ship shuddered violently as it neared the vortex, the gravitational forces threatening to tear it apart. Sparks flew from the console, and the lights flickered. Quinn gritted his teeth, fighting to keep the ship on course. "Almost there," he muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. His heart pounded in his chest, each second stretching into an eternity. Suddenly, the cockpit was filled with a blinding light. The energy from the rift flared, surging toward the Resolute like tendrils of lightning. Quinn felt a sharp pain in his head, a mental assault, as if Vorithis itself was lashing out, trying to stop him. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he thought he might black out. But then, through the haze of pain, he heard a voice not his own, but Kaler's. The alien's presence was faint but steady, a calming influence in the midst of the chaos. "You are not alone. Focus. Now is the time." Quinn took a deep breath, fighting through the pain. His hands moved with determination, locking the device's launch mechanism into place. The ship's display blared a final warning: detonation in 30 seconds. The ship bucked wildly as the forces around the rift grew stronger. Pieces of the hull peeled away, exposing the fragile innards of the ship to the raging storm outside. Quinn's grip tightened on the controls as alarms screamed in his ears. He could feel the ship coming apart beneath him, the vibration so intense that it felt like the Resolute was being torn in two. With a final, desperate lurch, Quinn activated the launch sequence. The device shot out from the ship's launch bay, a small, glowing object that disappeared into the chaos of the rift. The moment it entered the vortex, the entire nebula seemed to react, its colors intensifying, its energy flaring brighter than ever before. The countdown on Quinn's display ticked down. 5 seconds. He closed his eyes. 4. His mind filled with images of the people he had lost. His crew, their faces still clear in his memory. His failure at Dorgan. 3. But this time, it was different. This time, he wasn't running from his mistakes. He was making it right. 2. Quinn took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over him. 1. A blinding flash erupted from the heart of the nebula, brighter than anything Quinn had ever seen. The energy pulse exploded outward, engulfing the vortex and the rift in a wave of pure light. For a moment, the storm went silent. The nebula's violent energy stilled, as if the entire universe was holding its breath. And then, the light faded. Quinn opened his eyes to see the nebula calm, its swirling gases settling into a slow, steady rotation. The rift had sealed, the energy of Vorithis contained once more. But the Resolute was falling apart. Systems failed one after the other, and the ship's hull groaned as the structural integrity collapsed. Quinn felt the temperature drop as the life support systems shut down. The air became thin, cold, and his vision began to blur again. This is it, he thought. The calm in his mind deepened. He had done what needed to be done. He had given humanity a chance. His eyes fluttered closed, his body succumbing to the cold and the lack of oxygen. The darkness of space crept in around him, and for a moment, all was still. But then, a soft glow appeared in the distance. A beam of light, growing stronger, cutting through the darkness. Quinn barely registered it, his mind slipping away, but he recognized the presence. The Vorthali had not abandoned him. Kaler's voice echoed in his fading consciousness, gentle and steady. "You were always the key, Eli Quinn." The last thing he felt was a warmth, a pulse of energy wrapping around him, pulling him from the abyss. And then, everything went black. When Quinn awoke, he was no longer aboard the Resolute. He lay in a chamber bathed in soft light, the air warm and breathable. He blinked, disoriented, until he saw the figure standing at his bedside, Kaler, his tall form still and luminous, eyes glowing with quiet understanding. "You did it," Quinn whispered, his voice hoarse. Kaler gave no verbal response, but Quinn didn't need one. He could feel the alien's thoughts, a sense of calm and gratitude. The mission had been a success. Vorthus was sealed, and the galaxy was safe at least, for now. Quinn lay back, exhaustion pulling at him, but for the first time in years, he felt something new, peace. He had faced the unknown, confronted his own demons, and emerged on the other side. He wasn't a broken man anymore. He was the one who had dared to make contact, and in doing so, he had saved them all.